Hulk Hogan built his legacy on power and fame, but over the years, he's also been tied to a lot of controversy. It now looks like his kids may have been pulled into some of those situations as well, with both of them ending up in court and facing real consequences tied to it.
I've apologized to the Grazianos, but I want to say that I will never, ever be able to say I'm sorry enough.
So, what exactly are his kids tied to? And why do some fans think they could be facing serious jail time? Let me break it down. The case that started it all. On August 26, 2007, Nick Hogan, born Nicholas Allen Bolia in 1990, was behind the wheel of a yellow Toyota Supra in Clearwater, Florida. He was 17 years old. Sitting in the passenger seat was his friend John Graziano, a 22-year-old U.S. Marine who had done a tour in Iraq and was part of Hulk Hogan's pit crew. Nick was street racing against another car, reportedly a Dodge Viper, on rain-slicked roads. He was going over 60 miles per hour in a 40 miles per hour zone. He lost control, hit a median, and slammed the Supra head-on into a palm tree. Nick was wearing a seatbelt and walked away with minor injuries. He was released from Bayfront Medical Center the next day. John Graziano was not wearing a seatbelt. He was airlifted to the same hospital with massive brain damage, eye injuries, and a fractured skull. Hulk Hogan himself happened to drive by the crash site and recognized his son's car. He did not know yet if his son was alive or dead. The Supra was wrapped around the tree. Emergency responders were working on pulling John out. Hulk parked, ran toward the wreckage, and tried to get to Nick.
I remember the look on his face was just trying to see if I was alive or not.
A blood test taken about 2 hours after the crash showed Nick's blood alcohol level at 0.055%. Because he was under 21, that was nearly 3 times Florida's zero-tolerance limit of 0.2% for minors. The crash also came just 16 days after Nick's 4th speeding ticket in 11 months, with one of those tickets clocking him at 106 miles per hour. The pattern was already there. He was not a kid who had one bad night. He was a kid with a driving record that had been flashing warning signs for nearly a year before the crash. On November 7, 2007, Clearwater police arrested Nick. He turned himself in and was released the same day on $10,000 bail. The charges stacked up fast. He was hit with reckless driving involving serious bodily injury, which is a third-degree felony in Florida and carries up to 5 years in prison. He also faced charges for use of a motor vehicle in the commission of a felony for being an under-21 driver with a BAC above 0.2%, and for having a legal window tint, for separate charges out of one crash. John Graziano was in far worse shape. He was in a minimally conscious state, wheelchair-bound, and would need full-time care for the rest of his life. Graziano lost a portion of his brain in the crash. He was hospitalized for about 2 years before being brought home to live with his mother, Deborah, and his brother in Pinellas County. The Marine, who had come back from Iraq without a scratch, was now being spoon-fed at home by his mother. On May 9, 2008, Nick entered a no-contest plea to the felony reckless driving charge. The judge sentenced him to 8 months in Pinellas County Jail, 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and a 3-year driver's license suspension. Because he was a juvenile serving time in an adult facility, Nick was placed in solitary confinement for 23 hours a day, 1 hour out of his cell, 23 hours alone. That was his daily routine for the first stretch of his sentence until he turned 18 and was moved into general population. Nick ended up serving about 166 days, which comes out to roughly 5 to 6 months. He was let out early on October 21, 2008, for good behavior. Probation was later ended early in May 2012 after he completed his community service and stayed out of trouble. On paper, the legal chapter closed clean. A plea, a sentence, a release, and a quiet end to probation 4 years later. But while Nick was still behind bars, something happened that would damage the Hogan family name far more than the crash itself. Because what the family said to each other on the phone during those months in jail was about to become public. And once it did, the Hogans could never put that toothpaste back in the tube. The jailhouse tapes that exposed everything in May 2008. A reporter filed a public records request for the recorded phone calls between Nick and his parents. What came back was 36 hours of conversations that the Hogans had made from the jail phones. The family knew the calls were being recorded. Every inmate in Pinellas County Jail was told that calls were monitored, but the Hogans did not know those calls would ever be played on the news. They spoke like no one but the person on the other end of the line would ever hear them. When the tapes dropped, the backlash was immediate because the Hogans were not just supporting their son through a tough time. They were talking business, specifically how to cash in on his time in jail once he got out. The whole country was still processing the image of John Graziano in a hospital bed, unable to speak. And here was the family of the kid who put him there, plotting a reality TV payday.
Will you work on that reality deal?
Yep.
For me and get that thing lined up so the minute I walk out of wherever I walk out of, it's there, boom. I want to do it where I'll make the most money.
That was Nick talking to his father from behind bars. And Hulk's response in those calls was not to shut it down. According to reports on the released tapes, Hulk offered to make Nick an owner in a reality TV venture and said he would line up deals with Eric Bischoff and others. Hulk was actively working the phones to turn his son's jail sentence into a reality show payday. He was treating the incarceration like a marketing window. And then came the part that really set the internet on fire. In one of the calls, Nick referred to John Graziano, the friend now lying in a hospital bed with half his brain damaged, as a negative person. Hulk took it a step further. On the recording, Hulk speculated that Graziano must have done some bad things and that God laid some heavy things on that kid. Let that sink in. Hulk Hogan, the father of the teenager who had been drinking, speeding, and street racing, was on the phone suggesting that the Marine who nearly died in his son's passenger seat somehow deserved what happened to him, that it was some kind of karmic result of things John must have done, that Nick's drunk driving was just the tool it used. The tapes painted a picture the public could not ignore. This was not a family in shock trying to process a tragedy. This was a family strategizing, a family shifting blame, a family trying to figure out how to make the most money off their son's crime while the victim lay in a hospital bed. The tapes went from news cycle to news cycle. Talk shows played them. Radio hosts picked them apart. Every line became ammunition for people who thought the Hogans had been untouchable for too long. Nick himself later said he had been in a dark mental place when those calls happened. He described it as the deepest depths of mental insanity from being locked in solitary for 23 hours a day. He said there were times when you get so desperate that you stop making sense. That was the defense he tried to offer for why he sounded the way he did on those recordings.
I was in the middle of really going to the deepest depths of mental insanity, being in solitary confinement. There were times in there where you get so desperate and you're just, so just out.
But John Graziano's father heard the tapes, too, and he was not interested in mental state defenses. When he got his chance in the courtroom, he did not hold back. In his victim impact statement, Mr. Graziano delivered a line that became one of the most repeated quotes from the entire case. He said, "What Al-Qaeda could not do to my son, Nick Bolia did in a matter of minutes." Those words cut through every legal argument Nick's team had tried to make. A father standing in open court telling the world that a war zone could not take his son down, but a spoiled teenager from a reality TV family did. It became the quote that framed the entire public narrative of the case. Hulk went on Larry King Live to try to walk it back. He claimed the comments were taken out of context. He said he was just trying to lift his son's spirits during a hard time in solitary confinement, that he was saying whatever a father would say to keep his kid from breaking down in a cell. The public was not buying it. The tapes were too clear. There were too many hours of them. You could not take 36 hours of conversation out of context. The context was the whole thing. The threats started coming in, too. Anonymous voicemails were left warning that the Hogan kids would pay for what Nick had done. One of the messages played later on the news said, "Your kids are going to bleed, and your little son is going to bleed slow." Nick said later that he understood why people were angry. He said the calls were coming from a place of real rage, and he did not blame people for feeling that way. The Graziano family's attorney made it plain that Nick had never actually reached out, even after Nick got out of jail, and went on Good Morning America to talk about his regret. The family said they had not heard a word from him. The attorney told GMA that Nick had done nothing to show his remorse. The public tears, the nonprofit launch, the on-camera apologies, none of it had been backed up by a single direct attempt to contact the family. The jailhouse tapes were the moment the public stopped seeing the Hogans as a wholesome reality TV family and started seeing them as something else entirely. The Hogan Knows Best image was done. What replaced it was the image of a family caught on tape. And once that image was cemented, it never went away. The civil settlement and the money question while Nick was serving his jail time, another fight was playing out in civil court. The Graziano family had filed a negligence lawsuit against Nick, Hulk Hogan, Linda Hogan, and another man who was allegedly involved in the street race, Daniel Jacobs. The suit was seeking millions of dollars, and not just because of pain and suffering. John Graziano was going to need round-the-clock care for the rest of his life. The numbers tied to his care were staggering. Full-time medical attention, rehabilitation, specialized equipment, in-home nursing, feeding tubes, physical therapy, medications. All of it had to be paid for out of whatever the family could secure through the courts. And none of it was short-term. This was the rest of John's life. Decades of bills piling on month after month with no ceiling. Linda Hogan settled her portion of the suit first, ahead of her husband and son. She worked out a separate agreement with the Graziano family. Her name came off the lawsuit early, which left Hulk and Nick as the remaining defendants. That separation was telling in its own way. Linda's legal team pushed to get her clear of the civil case quickly, while Hulk and Nick stayed tangled in mediation for months longer. In February 2010, after a long mediation session, Hulk Hogan and Nick reached a confidential settlement with the Grazianos. The exact terms were sealed, but reports at the time put the settlement figure in the range of $5 million. According to statements from Graziano's mother, after legal fees and outstanding medical bills were paid out, about $1. $5 million was left to actually fund John's care. The family's attorney made a point of telling reporters that the money was 100% for John. That phrasing was deliberate. It was a signal to the public that the Grazianos were not pocketing settlement money or buying houses or putting anything aside for themselves. Every dollar that survived the legal fees and hospital bills was going directly toward the care of a young man who could no longer care for himself. That detail matters because while the Hogans were working phone deals for reality TV from behind bars, the people who actually had to live with what Nick did were staring down decades of medical bills for a young Marine who could no longer feed himself, walk, or speak the way he once did. The contrast was sharp. The Hogans were thinking about upside. The Grazianos were thinking about survival. When Andrea Canning asked about the settlement during her Good Morning America interview with Nick in 2010, she did not get a dollar figure. But the reporter confirmed on air that it was believed to be worth millions, and she made it clear that the money was going toward John's care.
Yes. What's happened with the civil suit with the Graziano family?
It is confidential, the settlement. However, it's believed to be worth millions. That's what they wanted. And it's to provide for the care of John Graziano, who does need 24-hour care.
Nick, for his part, went on television and cried. He told Canning that life had changed for him. He said he now thought cautiously about every decision he made.